This is what I have to deal with every time I want to shoot. Every single time. This is just my life. Dorian. Hi.
What's up, my fellow frilly folk? It is I, the Bard in Bows, and I have an incredibly exciting announcement to make. My book, The Railwalkers, I just signed the contracts with Tantor Media, and it is getting an audiobook by the end of the year, and I'm so freaking excited! Thank you to everybody who's bought the digital. If you're looking for a physical copy, I've talked with my publisher, and we should have a physical copy as well as the audiobook coming out around the same time. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you to everyone who's supported me so far. This is an incredibly exciting development, and I've been wanting to announce it forever, and now I finally can. Ah! Alright, back to the actual, topic of the video. So there is a conversation, especially lately, although we've seen this conversation a million times before, that centers around ConCrit culture in the Lolita community. Now, we can argue till we all turn blue about whether ConCrit is moral or amoral, whether it helps people or keeps people away. There's definitely plenty of arguments in that department. What I'm more interested in is why Lolita has this sort of accepted culture of criticism and constructive criticism alike. Now, I am definitely not an expert in the fashion because I've only been doing this for a few years, but I've noticed a couple of things that differentiate Lolita from its counterparts like goth or even cosplay. For argument's sake, I am going to be comparing Lolita to goth a lot, not only because they have a really comfortable intersect, but because they started around the same time, they have a lot of the same influences, and very similar people sort of gravitate to both fashions. And while there are a lot of similarities there are also some really big differences. Lolita is sort of its own beast as far as the construction of the subculture and the construction of the fashion. So I boiled down why Lolita is the way it is to about 3 general reasons. Obviously, this is just my take and my interpretation. It doesn't have to be right. 3 big reasons as to why Lolita is the way that it is. Number 1, there's a lack of content in the fashion. And I'll get to what that means in a second. Number 2, it's expensive as f***. And number 3, Lolita, whether you want it to or not, has an intrinsic interpretation by a majority of the community. So let's tackle number 1 first, a lack of content. That doesn't mean that people aren't talking about it, there aren't enough YouTube channels, it's not mainstream enough. That's not what I mean. So Lolita first started on the streets of Harajuku in an attempt for women to sort of dress for themselves, as opposed to society standards, which is very similar to its goth counterpart, but where the similarities end is the influences on the fashion. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't J fashion and Lolita fashion elements in things like music and media. There are, but oftentimes those are a symptom of the fashion and not the other way around. Goth specifically has its roots in music. Very, very, very strongly. You cannot talk about old school goth without referencing the Smiths and other goth bands that I know of. A lot of alternative fashions actually stem from music and other media. For example, I worked for a little bit in a pinup store, and all of the fashions there were actually based off of fashions from certain historical time periods. When you have influences outside the clothing, you're able to essentially rely on those other elements in order to make up the lifestyle of your subculture. Am I losing anyone? Basically, other alternative fashions have more legs to stand on. You don't have to dress in all black and chains and spikes in order to really be goth if you adhere to the lifestyle, if you read the books, if you love the music, if you go to the clubs, things like that. Lolita doesn't have that. Despite all of the aforementioned symptoms of the fashion, like Malice Miser and certain J-pop bands, things like that, Lolita has always been about the clothes. If you are a Lolita, it's because you're wearing Lolita. Like, there's no... Like, you can have a Rococo influence, you can have a bougie aesthetic, but that's not Lolita. Lolita is your wardrobe. It is the clothes that you put on your body. It's so centered around what you wear, and everything in the subculture springs from that. Tea parties spring from wearing dresses. The etiquette springs from wearing dresses. The behavior in public springs from wearing dresses. All of it comes from what you wear. So when you have a fashion that is that dependent on your actual outfit, it becomes more unforgiving. Basically, if this is all we have, there's less wiggle room for doing it badly, right? The Lolita police are here. So that's sort of the surface level of why things are the way they are. Number 2, it's f***ing expensive. This is not a surprise to anyone. This is a luxury fashion. Like, you're expected at a certain point to have essentially paid out the equivalent of half a kidney for most of your wardrobe. And while Lolita is becoming more accessible, and I love that, don't get me wrong, like, I am all for Taobao shopping and indie brands and that sort of thing, generally, when you put that much money, when you put that much investment into something, you're sort of really into it. Like, there's no in-between, right? You can't, like, kind of be Lolita. You can kind of be into kawaii fashion and J fashion and decor and things like that, because that's less of an investment. That's less of a time and a money sink. Lolita has these stringent rules because you put so much effort and money and time into what you're wearing that, like, there better be guidelines or it's gonna explode everywhere, and there's gonna be, like, bits of petticoat and viscera and, like, half the Taobaos. It's gonna be like the Death Star, essentially. I don't know where I'm going with this. I've lost the plot. So that's a pretty basic understanding of this fashion, is that this is expensive. And the more money you put into something, the more seriously you're gonna take it. Now, number 3. There is intrinsic value placed upon Lolita. Here's what I mean by that. How I mentioned earlier that Lolita has its roots in women essentially dressing for themselves. Now it's definitely become something strayed a little far from that, but not that much. Obviously, we're far more open to, non-presenting feminine people. We're more into non-binary people and queer spaces and things like that, and we're slowly and surely starting to open up. But even though we're opening up to more members, the idea that Lolita is about dressing for yourself, I think by and large, is sort of understood from the get-go. That's why we fight so hard against people trying to sexualize or fetishize or infantilize us, because that's not what this is about. It's never what this has been about. It's always been about, what do you want to wear? What do you want to put on your body? And it doesn't matter what anyone else says. It's non-sexual, non-fetish, just surface level princess dress. So when you have those kind of really strong, passionate opinions about this thing that you've spent so much money on that has no other counterpart within the subculture, you tend to be really serious about it. We want all of our members to be put together, to look good, to basically represent part of the fashion community in the wild. And there are times when that desire sort of manifests itself in not great ways. Like, here's the thing. There is a line between, like, telling someone that their pinks don't match and, like, being like, hey, I don't want any fatties or uggos or black people or, queer people or people with disabilities. Like, if you think like that, fuck off, I don't want you here. But there is some value to the idea that you want to maintain quality among the fashion community. Now that's sort of the all cards on the table, I feel, why we are the way that we are. Now, how do we deal with that? Because we're all coming out of quarantine, we're all a little squirrely. Like, I get it, we're starting to get upset over petty. So I am of two minds for this. The first plan of action is for the vets, the people who have been here a while, the people who are more established, who know what they're doing. And you see someone in like a tutu and an office blouse calling it Lolita, you're absolutely going to have the urge to tell them, like, hey, maybe not, maybe don't. And that's admirable, because as I mentioned, like, this is a really passionate community. But when it comes down to it, you can't force someone to wear things the way you want them to wear them. Like, it's their body, it's their clothes, so, like, even if it's the most horrible monstrosity ever, the most you can say is, that's not how it's done, and then leave it at that. You know, not everyone is going to want to fit in or conform to our fashion community, and that's just something that you have to accept. You can't control other beings. You can't control other people, especially other people who don't know you. The best thing I can say is that if you are an established Lolita and you're being driven crazy by a bunch of Idas filling up your timeline, if you want to, like, fight the good fight and say, hey, you know, maybe try this instead, sure, but don't drive yourself crazy. Just, like, focus on you, focus on your wardrobe, focus on your friends, focus on your calm, and, like, if they want the advice, they'll come to you for it, or they'll be receptive to it, and so on and so forth. Now, the other side of this is if you're a newbie. Now, I am speaking from personal experience, because when I first started Lolita, I didn't like rules. I was like, I'm not gonna pay attention or listen to anybody. I'm gonna do it cheap, fast. I'm gonna do it my way. And all that happened as a result of that was I had a bad image of the Lolita community as a whole, and I looked really shit. I was bad. I was very, very bad at it. And it was only after I started paying attention and listening to criticism and understanding what worked and what didn't that my wardrobe started to look a little more put together and a little more cohesive, and I started to understand what the community was and what the fashion was. Now, obviously, this is not like I'm telling you to be okay with abuse. Like, if somebody is ripping on your personal appearance or your disability or whatever, like, f*** those people, you don't need those people. But if someone is genuinely trying to reach out and be like, hey, maybe don't wear Crocs, you know, with angelic pretty, they might know what they're talking about, and you should probably understand that they're not talking about you as a person, they're just talking about your clothes. So long as you're open to that, I feel like you are able to find the better parts of this community and really enjoy your experience once you're willing and able to accept what other people are trying to help you with. So that's going to do it for today. That's the video. Thank you so much for supporting my work and coming to my channel. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like this video, share it, all that fun things, because I want YouTube to pay me eventually. As I mentioned, my book, both print and audiobook, are going to be coming out hopefully by the end of the year. I'm so excited. I'll link to my books down below if you want to get started on the digital copy. I know they just had a sell, but I think my ebook is normally like $5 to $7, so if you could support me there, that would be great. I've been getting really great reviews on it so far. If you want to review it, hit me up, we'll figure something out. I really want more reviews, more work. I'm really proud of this book. Anyway, but until then, I'm gonna go sweat my tits off because it's hot. Bye!